I got a good recipe for you folks. It's for a 12-foot wide wood framed house. It can be as long as you'd like, but there's other recipes also for 24 feet wide and 36 feet wide. I'm talking about building codes, specifically prescriptive design codes. And no, I'm not talking about government building code stuff. I told you I'm talking about a recipe. When eating out gets too expensive, you might just make spaghetti at home. So let's look at some spaghetti housing maybe you can do on your own. Everyone associates the International Residential Code just with government regulation, but really, it's just modern standards of construction. So here's the requirement, is that buildings and structures have to safely support all loads. And this section ends with, structures constructed as prescribed by this code are deemed to comply. Prescribed is like a prescription, but let's think about it like a recipe. Now remember, the requirement is that you safely support all loads, so you don't have to use a recipe. You could get a chef and have any kind of design you want created that's proven to support the loads. It's only once you choose to use the recipe and go to, say, Chapter 5 for your floors, then you get language like floors shall be designed and constructed in accordance with the provisions of this chapter. Ooh, shall be. That sounds like government, Glenn. The government is going to make sure you build a structure to safely support all loads. If you choose to use the simple recipe I'm going to show you, then you're held to it. But that's the first lesson in where people misunderstand the way this prescriptive design method is written. None of it is required until you choose to use that recipe. It shows you a layout of your floor, and it points to various places to get details for the other pieces and parts, like floor joist spans. And you have optional recipes, like cantilevering those floor joists to support an exterior balcony. Recipe. Now, the one ingredient in that recipe is solid sawn lumber, like using potatoes. And that's how the recipes in the IRC are designed. They're based on whole foods. But let's say you want to use some yogurt in a recipe. Well, that's a processed food. So there's going to be other rules from other governments, right, like the FDA, to make sure that yogurt's safe. And that's the same way to look at things like structural composite lumber, engineered lumber. That's going to be different approvals. With those approvals, you can substitute them in these recipes. You keeping up? Let's go check out walls. That's the next chapter. And there's that similar kind of language saying that you shall build it and design it in accordance with these provisions. But that's only after you choose this recipe. It tells you all the different type of fasteners you need, all between these connections here. You get some more figures for the overall layout of the wall construction, and you get those notes for things like sizing a header. Now, headers get trickier to size than joists because they're not just supporting themselves and their own span, but there's also the variable of how long the joist spans are that are bearing on the header. And this is when the 12, 24, and 36-foot building width comes into play. So you've got this table for sizing those header spans in exterior bearing walls. And if you notice, it shows you different locations that are going to have different loads, like a header here supporting only a roof and ceiling, or one here supporting a roof, ceiling, and a center bearing floor. You've got the same, but a full spanning floor. And this goes on for more stories. This recipe accommodates different regions and what your snow load is. And here's where we get that building width. And you can see under a 50 pound per square foot snow load, you get an option in the recipe for a 12-foot building, 24-foot wide building, or 36-foot wide building. And that building width would be this distance from here to here. See what I mean about a recipe for spaghetti? It's for a basic, simple, affordable home. 12 feet wide, 24, 36, a simple rectangle. That'll do. Let's brace those walls so they don't fall over in the wind. But where's the wall we're designing? Is it this one, this one, this one? This one, this one, this one. People complain to me that the code is so complicated, but other people fail at a recipe for spaghetti. So you'd have to think a recipe for a whole house is going to be a little complicated. So let's fast forward and get on to talking about the roof ceiling. And reminder, there's that same section that seems to say that you have to build all roofs like this. But we know what it's really saying is, hey, you chose not to go hire a private chef and just use this simple recipe. So follow it. So just like for joists, you get a table for rafter spans. All kinds of variety. And you get that overall illustration giving you pointers to all the other details of the recipe. Now, the dream home that I plan and will build someday is going to be spaghetti, a simple rectangle. And that's going to keep it affordable. But it's also going to be high performing. And that's where we could talk about Chapter 11 and the energy conservation provisions in that big old recipe book called the IRC. See, folks often put down the code as the worst you can build and still be legal. But I'd like you to flip that perspective and think to yourself, this is a code that provides you basic instruction for building yourself a perfectly fine, modest home that performs well and will be safe for your family and many more families for years to come. People just associate the code with government rules, but maybe you're living in a location where there isn't an adopted code. Wouldn't a recipe of modern construction standards, but are basic and affordable, still be useful? And I'll end this with, how long do you think we, the people, have been creating a basic recipe book for home construction? Well, the oldest code that I have with prescriptive design is from 1946. And let me show you the inside. And doesn't that look familiar? And if you want to learn more about the recipe of wood frame construction and the IRC, come out to Loveland, Colorado on March 5th, where I'm teaching a full day class, Conventional Wood Frame Construction. This is the Colorado chapter of ICC's Education Institute. Go to this link for more details.